Thank you, Tom MacCallum, for a very good history on the start of Camp Mackall. I'm Norris Hodgkins, and I'll be telling about some of my memories as a teenager in Southern Pines of the impact of Camp Mackall on the little towns of Aberdeen, Southern Pines, and Pinehurst. The first picture I'm showing is Broad Street in Southern Pines in the 1940s, starting where Betsy's Crepe is now and going north on Broad Street. The next block was very popular with the soldiers from Camp Mackall. It had two soda fountains with drugstores that had soda fountains in those days. A very popular restaurant, Jack's Grill, and further down was the Sunrise Theater, which catered to the soldiers and was a very popular spot. The counterpart theater across the street by Mr. Piquet was run more like a Broadway theater. He would not allow popcorn and soda in his theater, so that made the Sunrise popular because they encouraged that. The next photograph is the Southern Pines High School, where I was attending at the time. It's the site of the Southern Pines Elementary School today. One of the high points of my high school career was when our basketball team won the county championship. I'm there in the middle holding the ball. At that time, before consolidation and desegregation, there were both white and black schools in all the little towns in the county. Fortunately, our white school didn't have to play the black school, or we would have gotten beaten pretty handily. But when we won the county championship, we had to celebrate, and surprisingly, our parents let us attend Scotty's Tavern, which was a very popular spot for soldiers from Camp Mackall. It's located where Richmond Reynolds is today. Fortunately, the night we were there were no fights, which was the exception rather than the rule. A more genteel place for the girls in our community was the USO at the Southern Pines Civic Club. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to attend, and all the pretty girls seemed to prefer going to the Civic Club rather than going out with us. Several of the local girls met their future husbands at dances at the Civic Club. You know, we had some wonderful people who retired to Southern Pines after the war, and one of the finest was General Bill Yarborough. He's shown here with General Jim Gavin, who was also a retiree who lived in Southern Pines. Bill Yarborough was one of the real founders of the airborne troops during the war and also the special forces after the war. This is a famous picture taken in 1961 where General Yarborough and his troops were reviewed by President Kennedy. There's a famous conversation that went on where the president told General Yarborough, "Those are good-looking headgear your men are wearing, General." Yarborough's reply was, "But they're not regulations, sir." Kennedy then said, "They are now, soldier." So that was the start of the Green Berets. One of the things that Tom had mentioned earlier was the location of the Army Technical Training Command at the old Pine Needles Hotel. It so happens that I'm living in that building at the present time, which is a retirement home sponsored by St. Joseph of the Pines. A beautiful place, and I'm glad it's been kept intact. It probably was more famous as a technical training command than the more famous thing was that Glenn Miller was there. At the same time, the Air Force took over the Knollwood Airfield, and an air base was established between Laurinburg and Maxton that was primarily for glider. All of this was part of the training at Camp Mackall. The airborne troops were criticized by General Eisenhower after the airborne attack in 1943 on Sicily. In order to correct the problems that were discovered at that time, there was a training exercise that Tom has talked about very well that involved the capture of the Knollwood Airport in 1943. The local newspaper reported on that maneuver that several of the gliders had crashed in the area along Midland Road, and a lot of the paratroopers were hanging in the trees. Unfortunately, they didn't let me out of Southern Pines High School to go watch that, but it would have been a sight to see. That operation was considered such a great success that the airborne and glider troops were used extensively in the D-Day operation the following year in 1944. Another visitor to the Sandhills at that time, who later became a resident, was General George Marshall. This is an interview that I think may have been in front of the old Pine Needles Hotel. Mrs. Marshall often accompanied her husband on his trips to review the troops at Fort Bragg, Knollwood, and Camp McCall, but she would stay at the Carolina Hotel in Pinehurst. On one of those visits, they found a retirement home in Pinehurst on Linden Road, where they lived during his retirement years. The next picture is a picture of George Marshall in that Pinehurst house on Linden Road. I'll have to share one interesting story about General Marshall in the retirement years. The Pinehurst Forum had some wonderful speakers coming, and we noticed that a former professor of mine at Duke, Dr. Theodore Ropp, was coming. My wife and I signed up to attend. Dr. Ropp was giving a talk on the defense of Europe. As he came out, he saw General Marshall on the front row and visibly gulped, but he went ahead with his talk and praised General Marshall very heartily, and all went well, but I'm sure he had quite an unusual feeling when he saw him there in the audience. Well, at the end of the war, Camp McCall was decommissioned about as fast as it had been built when the war started. Those tar paper shacks came down in a hurry. They also auctioned off a lot of surplus property. This picture of a Jeep was similar to one that my friend Tim Ives bought for his use at Paint Hill Farm. I wasn't so lucky. I wish I had one just like that. I also heard that Fred Monroe, who owned the West End movie theater, was able to purchase a very fine projector at a bargain price from this surplus sale. Camp McCall became a sub-post of Fort Bragg, but the history of Camp McCall didn't end at that time. The Army retained the 7,500 acres that had been Camp McCall, but the remainder of the property was all transferred back from the federal government to the state of North Carolina, but the Army did provide that training exercises could be carried out on all of the Sandhill Game Land preserved land. And now to talk about the present use of the Camp McCall area for the Special Forces training, I'll turn it back to Tom MacCallum.